So first of all, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to be starting with a rock. And so for the rock, I'm simply going to go to add quick content, and then we can simply start adding assets. Let me just wait for it to open. Right, so I'm simply going to go to environments, this collections, and then environment, and then I can just simply go to maybe natural, and then we're just going to be browsing this. Now obviously you can choose whichever one you want. For example, if you want a cave which has assets like this, for example, like stone assets, and maybe it has a desert vibe to it, then you can do that as well. Actually, you know what, instead of going with the exact one which I did before, let's go for something else, because the one which I used before was if I can just find it, I think it was, no, not this one. Let me just find that. I just want to show you guys, if for example any one of you want to make that exact one, then you can. However, again, I would not recommend you to do that. I would recommend you to use your own creativity. Was it? Yeah, it was this one, Tundra. I think that's what it's pronounced. So the main asset which I used was, where did it go? Yeah, it was this one, I think. Tundra Rocky Ground. So the way I used this was simply by adding it in our scene. And I'm just gonna turn this filter off. And just simply by dragging this into our scene, and then you can basically just go ahead and start placing it and rotate it and just place it to basically cover up the whole scene. And that's all there is to it, to be honest. It's not really hard. It's just a little time consuming, and it requires creativity. So that's something which I would recommend you guys to practice on. And then you can just simply duplicate it. Oops. You can simply press Alt and duplicate it, and obviously be sure to scale it up or scale it down, or you can even rotate it so that it doesn't really look very repeated, of course. And even if it doesn't look good, even if, for example, this doesn't really blend in well, don't worry about that, because we are going to be adding foliage later on, which is going to cover basically all of this. So yeah, we just need a basic outline to paint our foliage on. So yeah, that's basically it. And so instead of using this one, I'm just going to go with another collection. Let's go for something else. So for example, let's say if this time we want something like a sandstone vibe, I think that should be good. So the main asset which I'm going to use is, how about we use this one? Let's try adding that. And so obviously you can use multiple assets, so maybe I'm going to use that as well. Let's place that in. Let's see how large it is. Okay, so what I'm going to do is that I'm simply going to be, yeah, I think that should be fine. That should be pretty good. So let me just import a few of these assets, and then we're just going to start painting, start creating our whole scene. Let me just drag this in. So I'm just going to download and add them. Obviously, if you don't have them downloaded, then I would recommend you to just set your quality to medium or something like that. If your computer is pretty fast and you have a really high download speed, then you can go for high quality or maybe even nanite. Nanite is obviously the best option. It gives you the best performance and the best quality as well. However, it is a pretty large file, so you're going to need a very fast internet connection if you want to add this, right? So there's that, and I think we're good with this. I think 4 assets should be more than enough. Be sure to save your project, press save all. And now we can simply go ahead and start working on the scene. So what I'm going to do is simply, I'm just going to drag this up and rotate it approximately 90 degrees, maybe something like that. Scale it up, of course, because obviously the larger your assets are, the less assets you're going to have to add, and that's going to be time efficient. And so if some of your outline is visible, don't worry about that, because we are going to be deleting all these shapes later on. These are just for our own guide and our own, so that they help us. Actually, I'm just going to be placing something like that. Move it up like that, because it's sort of making that line, right? That should be good, and it's blending in pretty well as well. The only thing which I am going to do is I'm going to bring this forward so that it blends in even better. Perfect. So now what I can do is I can simply go ahead and maybe add another asset. Now, if you use one asset over and over again, then it might look a little repeated. So I would recommend you to use multiple assets. Um, Now this might be a little abstract of a scene because obviously we are going to be adding foliage on top of this, and usually usually this type of rock does not have foliage on top of it. So yeah, it is going to be a little abstract, and I mean that's the power of Unreal Engine, right? You can basically do whatever you want, and that's what I like about it. It's not important for you to be physically accurate as long as you know what you're doing. Of course, just don't do something which is extremely unrealistic, and you should be good to go. Let's add it right there. So this is basically just like Lego, just putting pieces together, and there's really not that much to it. And it's a pretty fun process as well. And I think that should be fine. That's where our door will go. And okay, so I think we're good. Right, let's add this one somewhere there. Obviously, I'm gonna have to scale it up quite a lot. That should be fine. And perfect. So now what we can do is that we can simply basically duplicate these and we can move them around because all of our assets have been used up, and now all there is left, all that's left is to just fill the whole scene with these assets. So I'm gonna do exactly that. And let me just, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm simply gonna be duplicating this. Let's rotate it and let's scale it up quite a lot. And scaling up assets is also gonna be time efficient, and it's gonna save up time because obviously the larger your assets are, the more space they're gonna cover, and the larger your assets are, the less assets you're gonna have to add. So obviously that's gonna be time efficient. And let me duplicate this one right here. Move it up and let's rotate it. You can even use the other views if you want. For example, if I just go ahead and I'm just gonna move this down. If I just go ahead and go to the top view, you're gonna see that we can add our assets like that as well. We can position our assets using the top view. So that's another option which you have. Okay, so I think that is fine. Perfect. So this part of the cave is done. How about the other one? I'm just gonna rotate this like that. And let me move it forward. Let me just duplicate this and scale it up like that. And I'm just going to be rotating this. Something like that. And again, I'm going to scale it up just to sort of break up that uniformity. And ideally, you should never have two exactly same assets in your scene, because if, for example, I do that, yeah, that's the perfect example. For example, if I have something like that, you're gonna see that it looks very obvious that, for example, these crevices right here are basically exactly the same as these one, and so it looks very repeated, and that's something which you want to avoid at all costs. So just be sure to rotate it, be sure to scale it, and just add that sort of non-uniformity to it, if that makes sense. So I think that should be fine. Let me just move it back a little bit and make sure to cover all the space. I think that should be good. Right, so that is done. And now let's move on to the next step, which is going to be, let me just add a material to the floor first, and then we're going to be laying down some assets on the floor as well. So actually, you know what, before that, let me just go ahead and add the door, because I really want to get an idea of the scale of the door. And whether it fits in or not, because we might have to move the rocks around a little bit if it doesn't fit. So I'm just gonna search for door, obviously. And you have a lot of these options inside of Megascans. You can even go for something which is um, very very well made, or you can go for something which is made from this metal sheet. Something like that should be a good option. However, the one which I found, the one which I think looks the best is this one, old wooden door. You have other options as well. However, this one I think is on a level of its own. Again, if you don't like any of these, you can just simply go to the internet and you can search for wooden door, old wooden door 3D model, and then I'm pretty sure you're gonna find a lot of these. Just go to Sketchfab or something like that, and then you can search for these. Not that one, I don't think that looks good. You can go to Turbo Squid, CG Trader, download free 3D, and you have all these websites which you can download models from. Something like this is going to be pretty good. However, that's a paid model, so if you can afford to buy that, then be sure to do that. Otherwise, you can search for free ones as well. So for example, that might be a good option. Anyway, you get the point, right? You can just import models, and I would recommend you to first import them in an actual 3D software, something like Blender 3D, and then just check your models. Just go to Blender and let's just confirm if your models are have the correct models. So I'm just going to show you how to do that. Let's just go to Blender, and you can simply just import any model. It doesn't really matter which one. For example, if I have this cube, right? For example, if I just imported this cube, and the way you import models in Blender is by going to File, Import, and FBX, or whatever else format you have downloaded it in. And then what you can do is you can simply go select this model. You can just go up here and make sure that this face orientation is turned on, this thing right here. And if everything is blue, then that is perfectly fine. But if, for example, if anything is red, then that is not fine. And if it is red, what you can do is you can simply press tab to go into edit mode, press A to select everything. If let's say nothing was selected and I pressed A, it will select everything. And then you can just go to mesh, normals, and flip. Now right now if I flip them, they're going to become red, obviously, but if I go ahead and flip them again, no, my bad, mesh, normals, and flip. And so if everything is blue, then that's going to be fine. Otherwise you're gonna have some problems in inside of Unreal Engine. So I would recommend you to do that in Blender first, but obviously Megascans is the best option in my opinion. I'm just going to be importing that door like that. Right now it doesn't look that good because obviously the materials and everything is not that good in my opinion. Yeah, so that is the front side, right? That looks a lot better. However, we are going to be tweaking this later on, where we might increase the, what do you call it? You might increase the normal intensity and stuff like that when we are working on the lighting. However, for now, I think it's fine. I think something like that should be a good position. However, I'm just going to rotate this slightly like that. Because obviously it's not, it can be perfectly closed. And you can obviously scale it up in any axis which you want. However, I would recommend you to scale it up uniformly, basically. Maybe scale it down a little bit, and then maybe scale it up a little bit in that axis. Something like that should be pretty decent. Of course, we can make changes later on, and we might actually have to add some assets back there as well, but we're gonna do them later on. Right, so I don't think we really need a landscape material for this, because obviously it's going to be fully covered by assets. So what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to be copying any one of these, for example this one, and then I'm going to start making the floor. So for the floor, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to be taking an asset, I'm going to be scaling it up in the X and the Y axis, not the Z axis, because I want it to be pretty large. However, I don't want it to be that I don't want it to be that big in the Z axis. Something like that should be good. Obviously, don't scale it up too much, otherwise you're going to see the quality of this texture, which is obviously it's medium quality, so it's not that good. And then you can just simply go ahead and start duplicating it. And again, with this as well, I would recommend you to add randomness. That is literally the most important thing. Something like that should be good. Duplicate both of them and maybe place them right there. Obviously, we are going to have to adjust the door because I did not realize that we had to add these assets later on. And so maybe just move it down a little bit, something like that. And then just bring it down. I think that should be fine. But again, we are going to be making changes to the door. So let me just move these right there. And again, rotate them. And I think it looks pretty realistic. The assets are blending in together pretty well. And that's the good thing about Megascans assets. You don't really have to do that much work on them to actually blend them and make them look realistic. Everything just seems to work right outside the box. And that's something which is amazing for artists because you truly have your creative freedom and you don't really have to think about the technical aspect. Because previously you had to think about blending the materials and stuff like that, right? And that was a big hassle. But now all that is gone. Let me scale it up in the z-axis slightly and let's move it down because we want some of those bumps and crevices to be more prominent. And I think we are good. We're good to go with that. Because obviously we're not going to be seeing it apart from beyond this level. Maybe just add another asset like that. You might see some of these edges. I think that should be fine. Yeah, obviously. Okay. Let me just make a. Let me just duplicate one of these and bring them right there. But I think that should be fine. All right. So now what I'm going to do is that I'm simply going to be adjusting the position of this door. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to be scaling it down quite a lot. Just a tad bit like that. And let's move it up. I might have to move this around as well. Something like that. Make sure that it's not intersecting because it is, then that's going to be a bad sign. And in fact, I would recommend you to make sure that it is sort of touching, just barely touching the ground so that it looks as if the store is resting on the floor. Yeah, so I think that should be fine. And yeah, I think that's good. What I'm going to do is I'm going to be duplicating this asset right here. And I'm going to be rotating it like that. And let's place it something like that. Let's place it like that and move it down. Obviously, we are going to have to move it back. Something like that. Let me try rotating it because obviously right now it doesn't look that decent. Yeah, so I think that's good. Yeah, so what we did was basically we created like an inside wall of this cave, which is going to make it look pretty realistic and pretty good. So I'm going to be duplicating this again, and I am going to be moving it up. And I'm going to be placing it on the top as well. And let me move it back so that it's not intersecting from the front. And I think that should be fine. You can just go ahead and delete that. And make sure that this, I'm just going to have to scale it down a little bit again because this is intersecting and that's not something which I want. Something like that should be good. All right. Apart from that, let me duplicate this and let's place this exact same asset on that side as well. Like that. Let me rotate it. Like that. Perfect. And let me just move this door a little to the left now. And I think it should be fine. Yeah. Look, it's looking pretty good. It's looking pretty decent. The only thing which I'm concerned about is this part right here. So I might have to rotate this asset. Or I think we are good actually. Yeah, I think it looks very natural and I think we're good. Okay, perfect. So that part is done. And now let's move on to the next step, which is going to be firstly, you know what, let me just add some foliage out there, and then I'm going to be duplicating that and taking it back to make the inside of the cave. Now, the reason why I'm adding foliage first is so that we don't have to add it again, because obviously if I add foliage to this asset, for example, and then if I duplicate it, the foliage is also going to be duplicated. So we're not really going to have to add the foliage twice, and that's going to be good for us. Right, so what I'm going to do now is that I'm simply going to go back to Megascans, add Quixel content. I'm just going to search for a plant which is called blackberry. And that's a plant which I add on basically all of my scenes. And it looks very realistic for some reason. It's here, right here. And so I don't know why exactly, but it looks so realistic in every scene. Otherwise, of course, you can just simply go to the home and you can go to 3D plant, and then you can choose any one of these. But I've tried a lot of these, and in my opinion, the most realistic one for some reason is this. But again, obviously, we're not going to be adding just this, because obviously having one plant in your scene, just one variety of your plant, is not the way to go. It doesn't look realistic at all. So I'm probably going to add some herbs as well. First, I'm going to go to my foliage mode. Make sure that your assets are imported already. If they are not, then you can go ahead and just select all of them. Select the first one, shift and all of them, and then just drag it in. I'm not going to do that because obviously I have them already. And so maybe I'm just going to add some of this wood sorrel. Add that. And then you can just select the first one, go to the end, select the last one, and drag it in. I think that should be good. And now you can just simply go back to 3D plants, and you know what, let's try painting these, and then we're going to see later on if they look good or not. So I'm just going to select all of them, reduce the brush size, paint them, and okay, so right now the problem is that they are way too large. And so with all of them selected, actually, you know what, let me just confirm if it's just the blackberry which is large or the wood sorrel as well. Yeah, so it's just the blackberry. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to make sure that I only have the blackberry selected, so the wood sorrel is not going to be selected. And with this selected, I'm simply going to go to the scale X. I'm going to set it to 0.2 and maybe 0.3. Let's try painting it now. I think that is a lot better. However, it's a little too small. 0.5 to 0.6. I think that is a much better option. Yeah, perfect. Now make sure that your static meshes is turned on, because otherwise it's not going to paint on top of this these, what do you call it, this the rocks. And again, one problem which you're facing is it's not really going to paint on top of these walls that much. And the reason for that is if I just go down to this ground slope angle, it's going to paint from a minimum of 0 degrees to a maximum of 45 degrees. So if I set that to something like 180, now you're going to see that it's going to paint on all angles, which is perfect. So there's that. And now let's go ahead and start painting. I'm just going to reduce the brush size quite a lot. Okay, so right, so for some reason it doesn't look that realistic. Let's see what the issue is. First, let me just go back to my blackberry. Let's tweak the material a little bit. So I have a color overlay set on top of it, which doesn't really look good. I'm gonna turn that off. And now let's go down to the normal intensity and maybe turn off the normal so that it's a little more, you know, it's a little more sharp. But again, it doesn't really look that good. Right, so maybe we don't, maybe we shouldn't use blackberry for this. Let's try something else. So I'm just going to select all of them and I'm going to turn them off. Let's import this curbside weed. Let's drag them in. Make sure that all of them are turned on. And then I'm just going to try painting it. I think this one looks a lot better. Yeah, I think that's a much better option. So I'm going to be, you know what, I'm just going to be painting all of them. But with, but what I'm going to do is that I'm going to be reducing basically the density of this blackberry. So I'm just going to set it to 40 instead of 100. Select all of them, turn them on, and let's start painting them. Right, so basically, you know what, there are a few options which you have. The first one is going to be to paint the whole scene, just cover the whole scene with plants, and that what that's going to do is that it's going to hide your landscape a lot, and it's going to give it that cool look. However, that is just one look. The other option which you have is going to be to, let me just save this. Yeah, the other option which you have is to just add some plants at the edges, and then you can just leave the whole scene as it is. So you know what, with this scene I'm going to do that. With the previous one, if I just go to my previous scene, we can even go back to that just to see. I think it was Doran Forest one. I think it was that. Nope, Doran Forest. Yeah. Right. So with this scene, what you can see is that you can basically tell that it's covered with plants, right? But that's not what we're going to be doing around now. Now what we're going to be doing is that we are going to be just adding some plants. And by the way, if you think the lighting looks bad, that's because it actually does look bad. And we haven't really started working on the lighting yet. So let me just get done with the foliage first, and then we're going to be working on the lighting. So to actually remove all of these, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go to this erase option and make sure that your erase density is set to 0, and increase the scale of this brush, erase everything, but make sure that all of your plants are selected. Otherwise, it's not going to erase the plants which are not selected, obviously. So now we can just start. Let me just add some plants at the edges, and I think apart from that, it looks pretty good. So I'm just going to go to foliage, make sure that everything is selected. Just make your brush size very small. That is way too large. Something like that. Let's go to paint. Let's start painting it. Right, again, the problem is that the black size of this blackberry is pretty large. Maybe just do 0.3. Actually 0.2 to 0.3. I think that should be a much better option. Let me scale it down even more. I think, yeah, just adding some plants here and there is going to be a much better option. Something like that. Yeah, so I'm basically randomly adding these plants. Make sure to add them wherever you have these crevices and your sort of gaps. That's where usually plants are. I think that should be fine. Yeah, that looks pretty decent. And now we're done with the foliage. Let's move on to the next step, which is going to be, all right, so now we have two options. Either we can create the inside of the cave first, or we can start with the lighting and then we can move on with that. Actually, you know what? Let's just work on the lighting first, and then we're going to be creating the inside of the scene.